So spring ball, Ryan, you mentioned it. Spring ball starts in a couple days. I'm excited about spring ball starting. I'm really fired up about spring ball starting. We've had a lot of drama this offseason. There's been a lot of negativity with things that happened with the whole Andy Ludwig situation. Matt Luke turns Notre Dame down, which followed the fact that Harry Hiestand retired, which was a major bummer. Brian Mason leaves. And it just you lose Brandon Hillman. There's just been a lot of bad news, basically, for Notre Dame. And so the perception is this has not been a great offseason. That can start to change Wednesday because at the end of the day, I wrote an article yesterday, Ryan, and we can debate this maybe on another show. Maybe this might be a conversation for tomorrow. But the premise was if you take out all of the process that got you to where you are, I think I made a case that the coaching staff as a whole is actually better now than it was a year ago. From the standpoint of Chancey Stuckey's better than he was a year ago. I expect Dylan McCullough to be better. Al Washington. I mean, so all the second-year coaches you expect to be better. They know the players better. The players know them better. And then they were able to kind of add some good coaches and things like that. So, that's the case that I made. So for all the negativity, I do think that can be viewed as a positive. Marcus Freeman's going into year 2. But more so than that, Ryan, this is a really talented roster, in my opinion. And that's what I'm looking forward to seeing. And then you've got the new guys, Sam Hartman, Javante Jean-Baptiste, Thomas Harper, Caleb Smith, the kickers, Saunders. You've got the punter coming in from Penn. There's some new guys that add some really exciting aspects to this to where if you didn't land any of the transfers, I'm still pretty excited about this roster. But then you throw these guys into the mix, Ryan. A lot of early enrollees from what you and I thought was I don't know if you feel this way. What I thought is Notre Dame's best recruiting class since 2013. In my view, I don't care what the rankings say. I'm just telling you, looking at that group of players, I have not seen a better class top to bottom than since 2013. I'm excited about this team. I mean, they got a ton of guys coming back, and there's going to be some really interesting storylines that are going to happen with this team. And I think offensively is where we're going to start, Ryan, is I'm just really curious to see what are we talking about by the end of the spring.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes the spring so much fun.
It always does, man, because I think that you have expectations, obviously, going into the spring, right, Brian? I think most Notre Dame fans are looking at this offense, especially, and saying, like, hey, man, the main storylines, right, are the new guys. That's what you want to see. That's what you always want to see. Sam Hartman coming in and maturation of wide receivers that you didn't see as much last year. And who's the guy to kind of take that conversation piece to another level? But I think that ultimately that trajectory sometimes doesn't always hit fruition, right? Like we might enter the spring and say, Sam Hartman's the guy I want to see. But coming out of the spring, you're like, there's a different storyline that really kind of encapsulates the spring for Notre Dame. So I agree completely, man. I think that's the greatest thing about it is that every single year, no matter who the coach is, no matter what program you cover, there's always players that surprise you every single year. I wasn't talking about player X going into the spring. Leaving spring, he's probably going to start. He's probably going to be a substantial playmaker. Maybe this guy that you thought was going to be that dude didn't take a step forward and wasn't that type of guy. But hey, you have other guys that were competing with him, and they took a step forward. Maybe a guy doesn't, maybe a whole position group did not take a step forward. Maybe a whole position group did take a step forward. That's the most fun about spring ball for me, is that you have expectations going in, but there's always surprises. It's never as you expect. It is always a different conversation when the end of it comes.
You just hope that those surprises are good surprises. Right. It's not, wow, I expect this guy to be a whole lot better than he was. I think the first storyline for me, Ryan, that's worth discussing this spring is the coaching staff. And I think when you look at the offense, this is the second year in a row that the offensive staff is going to look a lot different. Sure. But the interesting thing is last year it was a brand new coaching staff outside of Tommy Rees. Now, yes, Harry Hiestand had been here before, but the last time Harry Hiestand was here, there was like 5 guys from last year's roster on the team. Like that was it. It was a different team, different era. He was new. He had to get to know Marcus Freeman and all the other coaches. He's gone. Tommy's gone. But you still have 3 coaches coming back from last year. So you actually have more returning coaches to this year's offensive staff than you had going into last year's offensive staff. But because it's a new coordinator, because it's a new O-line coach, the new quarterbacks coach, These are premium positions on offense. And I think that's where some of the angst goes. But I'm very curious how this dynamic plays, because on the one side, it's definitely a positive that Marcus Freeman went out and surrounded Jared Parker with two veteran. I mean, Gino Guidugli's not a veteran per se. I mean, he hasn't been coaching that long, but he's rose up the ranks pretty quickly. He's got experience at what Jared Parker's being asked to do. He's called plays for 2 years now. He was a guy that was the full-time OC in 2022 for Cincinnati, and his experience coaching quarterbacks and playing quarterback at a high level in college football. So I'm very curious to see how that dynamic goes, because on the flip side, you have two guys that have been coordinators that are now working under a guy that's never really been a full-time coordinator. Sure. And so how that goes, how that mesh happens between Coach Guidugli and Coach Rudolph and Coach Parker, and with Coach Stuckey and Coach McCullough with those guys, because now it's a whole new dynamic. How are they going to work together? That's something I'm interested in seeing, because if this staff meshes quickly, then I think the offense really takes off quickly during the spring. If they don't mesh quickly, then we may not see the offense really find its stride until the fall. So I think that's going to be an interesting aspect in a storyline that I'm going to be talking about and focusing on in the few practices that we get this spring.
You know why I know I'm weird, right? One thing that I'm so intrigued about is I kind of just want to watch Jared Parker. Like I just want to watch his mannerisms. I want to watch him, how he engages with the players as an offensive coordinator versus what he was as a tight end coach. I just kind of want to observe what the teaching looks like. I know that sounds really strange, because we all just want to talk about the players and being player centric and what is this guy looking like? How is he developing? And that stuff's all important to me as well. But it's just such a unique position, because we have high expectations for what this offense can be. You know why? Because there's a lot of talent there, right? So when you have a lot of talent, the key there is the people calling the plays, the people developing these players on a day in and day out perspective. And I'm really interested to see how Gino Guidugli interacts with that quarterback room on a day-to-day basis. What does that look like? I'm interested to see how much different the offensive line practices run with Coach Rudolph comparative to Coach Easton. I'm interested to see what Coach Parker, what the vibe is, what the energy is around the offensive staff. So I know it sounds really lame. I know it sounds really weird, but I honestly just want to be at a practice and watch Coach Parker and just watch his every move to see how does he interact with each position group? How does he run a practice? What's the tempo? All that type of stuff I think is going to be a big indicator of how good this offense can be. Because like you said before, Brian, I agree with it 100%. This is where the baseline's being built, right? This is the foundation. This isn't 100% identity. But part of the identity that I think you need this spring is to understand player interactions, how practices are run, what the expectations are, what the tempo is. That's type of stuff that I think needs to be really solidified this spring and to be shown and to be understood. And that's honestly one of my biggest takeaways this spring, is that I want to see what is the energy around these coaches, how do they run a practice, how crisp, how demanding, all those key things, because I think that could take this team from being a very talented and good offense to being one of the better offenses in college football. I think they have the type of upside. It really does depend a lot on what are the coaches and what is the development this spring as it starts now going into the further into the offseason. That's kind of the biggest thing that I want to see.
Well, I think the build on top of the mesh part, Ryan, is kind of what you were getting into. What are the changes we're going to see? Changes are going to come in twofold that are going to be important, Ryan, right? Number one is what you talked about. How are they structure practice differently? What's the impact that change of structure is going to have on the team? Do they push tempo more? Do they do more teaching? Do they? Yep. Is there more? I don't know. And change doesn't equal better. It doesn't equal worse. It's just change, and then we'll see what the results are, right? And so then I want to see what things that they do that are different, and what of those things really seem to work or not. And then the other part is you could take Tommy Rees's playbook. Right? Let's just say the Notre Dame playbook that Tommy Rees had, hand it to Jared Parker and say, run this, and it's still going to look different, because every coach within the same playbook is going to have different points of emphasis. Yeah, Tommy Rees ran a mesa duo, but we saw inside zone and some other things, whereas they may still run the same plays, but the structure of how they run them, the volume with which they run certain things or not, is going to be different. Could be different, I should say. They're going to run the same pass concepts, but they may overemphasize this relative to where they were, or maybe add some new wrinkles. So that's another part of this too, Ryan, is I want to see what the differences are. What changes does Jared Parker and this new coaching staff make? Gino Guidugli is going to come in with some pass concepts that he really likes, that he thinks could work here. Does Jared Parker take those? Does they implement those? Does Chancey Stuckey now in year 2 maybe have a little bit more say on some of that stuff? Hey, these are my guys. These are what they do well. Here's some things we can do with them. Does Jared Parker, is he receptive to that? Are there some ideas maybe he had for certain concepts that he thinks that he likes as a former receiver and receivers coach? Does Joe Rudolph have any influence on what the run game is going to look like? Those are all things that we have no clue what the answer is, Ryan. But those are going to be storylines that I'm going to be following and keeping a very close eye on as we get into the spring.
Yeah, it's going to be, I mean, it's really fun because even Brian, like it's even as simple as like on the offensive side of the ball from a coaching perspective, it's like you have new coaches that are in new positions, obviously, right? Like, so that's where like the headlines are going to go, right? It's like Jared Parker. What does an offense under Jared Parker look like? What does an energy around an offense under Jared Parker look like? I mentioned Joe Rudolph compared to what Harry Hiestand liked to do with the offensive line, but I'm even interested to see a second spring under Dela McCullough, a second spring under Chancey Stuckey. Does it look different at all with a new offensive coordinator? Do they inflect a little bit more of their personality into their teaching? There's so many cool storylines on the offensive side of the football. And I mean, honestly, man, like the Notre Dame not graphic design, but their Notre Dame media departments, whatever they call that area of it, right? Like how much cool stuff, videos and pictures can they get this spring with like Sam Hartman being the guy there, right? With the coaches engaging, with the coaches teaching, a gold mine of opportunity to really give some insight into what an offense looks like under Notre Dame heading into 2023. Again, I'm not asking for like the secret sauce to like what it's going to look like, but like you have a lot of storylines and a lot of opportunity to be really engaging with Notre Dame fans, which I also think is really interesting. And something that I hope Notre Dame takes advantage of a little bit, man. Like I want to know Sam Hartman on a personal level, you know? I want to know Jared Parker on a personal level. I want to know these guys, man. I think it's great content potentially for Notre Dame as well.
If Notre Dame doesn't produce at least a couple minute long mic'd up video, and not this 30-second stuff that gives you a little bit of fluff, and then like you're not giving the fans anything there. If you're not doing at least a couple minute long, and I mean, I would do like full blown productions a few times, but I don't think you can do that every single practice. But like at least a couple minute long mic'd up video on Twitter and on YouTube of every practice, and you have a coach mic'd up at a practice, you have some certain players mic'd up. Like I would love to see, like you said, Sam Hartman mic'd up, a day in the life of, Notre Dame's quarterbacks, and maybe you follow him and Tyler around. Like there are so many things like that Notre Dame needs to be doing this spring and into the summer that they're just not doing, that I think would give great exposure to the football program, but then to these players, and then, bring the fans in. I don't know if they're going to do that. I have my doubts. I don't think Notre Dame takes that stuff super seriously. When they do put out stuff, it's really quality. That's the disappointing thing, is when they actually take the time to make those things, Ryan, it's excellent. It's really excellent. They just don't do it enough, and I don't think they prioritize it enough. And so those are things that I want to see, Ryan. But even more importantly, that's great storylines, but the practicality, what the results are, is going to be important. And that leads into storyline number 3, the quarterback position.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always a big story, but there's so many different layers. Like, is it really a competition or not? How quickly will Sam Hartman adjust? How quickly do the players get comfortable with Sam Hartman? How is Tyler Buckner going to perform? Can he make a jump? Will he get better? Is he going to be bought in? Will he stay if he doesn't start? There's just, how's Steve Angeli going to develop in year 2? What's Kenny Minchie going to look like? Is he going to be on a pitch count this spring as he comes back from the shoulder injury? There are so many dynamics. What's the offense going to look like with Sam Hartman? Are they going to have a Tyler Buckner package? There's so much at quarterback that's just unknown, but also, man, really exciting, because there's legit 1-2 talent at quarterback that we haven't really seen since 2016, in a situation where you actually think more than one kid might have a shot to play. in my view. Like, this is way better than the dynamic of Ian Book and Phil Dracovic.
Right.
Because, I mean, Tyler's somewhat on the same level of what Phil was then, but Sam Hartman's a much more talented player than Ian Book, in my opinion.
Well, I want to see interactions around the quarterback position too, Brian. Like, I want to see Coach Gaduli, Coach Parker. Am I putting these guys into a lot of adverse situations in the spring, right? To see how they tick, what type of competitors they are. Because if they do that, then I'm automatically like, oh, this is a legit competition. Like, they are trying to breed competition. I want to see what makes Sam Hartman tick. I want to see in a 2-minute drill the pressure put on him. And then guess what? Next play, Tyler, you're in, brother, and let's see you in a 2-minute, and let's see what you look like in that adverse situation. So I'm interested to see the interactions there. I'm also interested to see what the interactions are between the quarterbacks on the roster, right? It's like Sam Hartman has the type of experience where Tyler Buchner can really benefit off of just being around him, right? But is Tyler open to that? I don't know that conversation. I don't know. I hope, I think, but at the end of the day, it's up to Tyler Buchner to take the most out of that opportunity to learn from Sam Hartman, because you could still fight for the starting spot and still understand that, like, hey, that guy's played more football than me. He's seen more than me. He can probably help me out on some of the mental side of the game, or at least, for preparation stuff. Like, you can do that. And then do you push the most to get out of Sam Hartman? Do you push the most to get out of Tyler Buchner? I'm really interested in just what the general vibe is around those quarterbacks. Because to your point, Brian, Sam Hartman has a big reputation behind him, for what he's done the last 2 years at Wake Forest and during his Wake Forest career in general. He's got records. He's got a good resume. Is he driven to be even better than what it was at Wake Forest? Or is he just complacent and just like, hey, I was good, man, but that's just, I'm going to continue what I'm doing? Or does he know that there's a step forward there that needs to be taken? Tyler Buchner, the ability to get better each and every day and match a guy like Sam Hartman and the resume that he has. Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey continue to get better each and every day. There's a bunch of individual storylines kind of interwoven together, but at the end of the day, we know that a big difference that needs to be happen in this Notre Dame program moving forward to go from a good program to a great one and then to an elite one and championship level one is that the quarterback position needs to be better. It just needs to be. It needs to be more consistent, needs to be on a week-to-week basis, more dependable. You need that type of competition, I think, in the room. Having Gino Gaduli now every day to be that quarterback coach, which is something that we haven't seen in an individual basis in a couple years, obviously, with the separation between quarterback coach and offensive coordinator. A lot of great storylines. And I'm more than anything, I'm just looking how much do each one of these players push each other in that room. Because I think that competition needs to happen this spring, because that makes Sam better, makes Tyler better, makes the depth better. And that is really, I think, what I'm most interested in is just see how those players interact with one another and interact with the coaches that are with them on a daily basis, obviously.
When this all builds, right, Ryan, it's coaching and scheme and quarterbacks. Well, then what's next? What playmakers are going to step up on the perimeter? That's another big conversation, because right now, Ryan, you and I are excited about the talent and potential of the wide receivers. But when you have to use the word potential as much as you and I use the word potential with this receiving core, it means it hasn't arrived yet. Yes. It means the production isn't there, right? After 2014, we weren't talking about Will Fuller's potential. We were talking about his production, what he had proven to be, and then he got even better that next year. Right now, we don't know what this group is going to be. We know the talent level. We've seen some small flashes from a lot of these guys, but we don't know what all of them can bring on a week-to-week basis, on a day-to-day basis in the spring. I'm very curious to see that. Does Lorenzo Styles have a better spring than he had last year? Does Tobias Merriweather start to kind of step up and emerge? Does Dion take that next step? How quickly does Caleb Smith fit in with the group? How quickly do the freshmen fill in? And what kind of role does Jaden Thomas take? Because I could see Jaden Thomas and Caleb Smith being sort of the two, leaders of the receiving core. And right. As far as like how they go about their business on an everyday basis. So, and more importantly, Ryan, at the end of the day, who steps up as the playmakers? And can you go out against this group of defensive backs, even if Cam Hart's not playing a ton, and can you make plays? Because it won't be easy. And how quickly do those players step up and say to Sam Hartman, hey, I'm your guy. Get me the ball. Throw me the ball. And those are those are things that I'm really curious to see is who steps up. And hopefully it's not just one person. Hey, Jaden Thomas had a great spring. Hey, Tobias Merriweather had a great spring. Hey, where it's just one guy. I want to hear like, man, I don't know who's going to start next year because I mean, Tobias balled out. Lorenzo looked like 2021 late season Lorenzo. Dion balled out. Caleb Smith is the real deal. Jaden Thomas kept built. Man, Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores are like the truth as freshmen. I don't know who's going to get the ball, man. Like, that's what I'm looking forward to seeing is who steps up at that position. Those are very exciting things.
How many times this offseason have we had the conversation and people pose this question all the time too? Who do you expect to be the guy at wide receiver? Who do you expect to be the main producer at wide receiver? And the answer is that there's a few guys that it could be. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Deion Colsey's the dude for Notre Dame. Wouldn't be surprised if Tobias Merriweather's the dude for Notre Dame. Wouldn't be surprised if Jaden Thomas is the dude for Notre Dame. I wouldn't be confident that this will happen, but I wouldn't be shocked if Lorenzo Styles had a bounce back year. Like I wouldn't be shocked about that because he's certainly talented. But at the end of the day, Brian, when you have so many options, what does the options actually mean though? It means that there's not a foregone conclusion. There's not an easy answer to that conversation. There's a lot of cool conversation pieces though, because there are so many different options. That's great. And we're going to be talking all offseason about 6'4" Tobias Merriweather, 6'5" Deion Colsey, Lorenzo Styles, who's very talented, 6'2", 215, Jaden Thomas, who's your best receiver at the end of the season. A lot of cool things that you can get excited about.
You just mentioned 4 guys and didn't mention the only guy on the roster that was an all-conference player last year in Caleb Smith.
Sure.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not saying that to criticize you. No. I'm saying, like, you just mentioned 3 talented football players. You didn't mention Lorenzo Styles, who we expected to be their number 1 receiver last year. You didn't mention Caleb Smith, who was an all-conference player last year.
Who's also
that's the point in a receiving core that had 2 guys that were top 100 recruits, right? You didn't mention any of those guys. And that's the exciting thing. But it's also the question mark because who is going to be that guy?
And I mean, it even could be a situation where if players don't take steps up, it's like Caleb Smith is the most dependable guy, right? Because he's played so much football. I mean, and he's 6'2", 220 pounds. So, like, I don't want to sell Caleb short and be like he's not talented. Like, he's 6'2", 220 and has a really good catch radius, extends for the football well.
So 18 yards a catch last year with a terrible quarterback.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention the fact that, Braylon James might be the most gifted wide receiver on the roster. Like, he has a conversation there. Jaden Greathouse.
Nobody produced in high school the way the next kid you're going to talk about produced.
Yeah, no, Jaden Greathouse is, I mean, historically, Brian, like Austin Westlake in Texas is one of the premier programs in all of high school football. Well, there's a good argument that Jaden Greathouse is one of the best to ever strap up a Westlake helmet on, man. Like, he's that type of football player. 50 career touchdowns, was a part of a 53-game winning streak, 3 state championships in 6A ball in the state of Texas. I wouldn't be shocked if Jaden Greathouse led the spring as a guy that needs to play in 2023. Like, I wouldn't be shocked at all because he is nuanced, he's athletic, he's strong, and I not even mentioning Rico Flores, who also did all he did at a program like Folsom High School in California.
We could do this all day. We can talk about
littered with talent.
This guy. What about that guy? The storyline, however, Ryan, is who
exactly
becomes that guy, or who becomes those guys. That's even more important. Yeah. That's the more important thing. And who does Tyler Buckner and Sam Hartman develop the most trust with? And here's the thing. We didn't even get into the tight ends. How they're going to use the running backs out of the backfield. There's so much potential for this pass game, Ryan. I'm excited. I really am. I don't know if we're going to see it necessarily really take off early in the spring. Like, timing, pass game takes time to get on the same page. So it's not, if it comes out the first couple open practices and they're just lighting the world on fire, you're like, okay, this is going to be really good. I don't necessarily expect that. I think we'll see flashes of it, but I'm really curious to see who steps up. And then finally, kind of the last storyline we'll discuss is the one true position battles. Because the reason that's different is I don't think quarterback's really a battle right now. I think it's Sam Hartman's job to lose. Receiver, you could say they're battles, and there are tight end, but they're all going to play, right? Like, they're not just, okay, well, you're starting boundary, the other guy's never going to play. Offensive line's a different animal because usually the starter's that's the guy you're going with. And so both guard spots are open, Ryan, and how well the guys that win and earn those jobs play is going to go a long way towards determining just how good this offensive line is going to be, because it's got a chance to be special, but you can't have a great line if you're not really good up the middle. And right now there's two huge question marks at the two guard spots. And it could just be guys step in, they play great, you keep rolling. But if you have problems, and we saw this with Sam Mustipher, for example, in 2016, I felt that Sam really struggled that year. And because he had to worry so much about the right guard position. It was such a problem. And that he settled in when it got better. We saw this in 2021 with Jarrett Patterson, where early in the year, I thought Jarrett struggled because he was worried about both. Zeke was struggling at left guard. Kane Madden was an issue at right guard. But once Andrew Kristofic kind of came in at left guard, and Kane Madden he knew what he was doing at least. Then Jarrett Patterson started playing better because he didn't have to worry as much about what's going on next to him. And I think that's an interesting thing too, because if the guards don't play well, then that could end up dragging Zeke Correll down as the center because he's got to worry about so much. So we don't talk about it as much. It's not as sexy as the quarterback talk or the coaching staff or the receivers or the whatever. But, man, it is a very important battles that are going to be raging at both guard spots. And I'm curious to see who steps up this spring and says, this is my job. Or does anyone step up this spring? Or do a couple guys play so well that you're like, man, this battle's going to have to go into the fall because these guys both played like starters at right guard and they both played like starters at left guard. You kind of actually hope a little bit that it's the latter, to be completely honest with you, Ryan, that multiple guys step up and they make themselves better. And then we go into the fall thinking, well, I think Billy Schrauth is going to be the guy, but did you watch Ty Chan, or did you watch Rocco, or did you see Sam, or did you see Carmody, or did you, that kind of thing. And so I'm very curious to see how that battle is going to rage, because it's not sexy, but it's a very important position battle that's going to happen this spring.
And with any battle, with any competition, the worst case scenario is that someone wins it by default. Like, you never want that, right? You never want guys to just kind of be on the save level, but like not a level where you're just like everyone's getting better and everyone's really taking a step forward. It's just like everyone's just fine, right? Like, you don't want that to be the case. And this is a similar conversation to the wide receiver talk, I think, Brian. I mean, you have a litter of very talented interior offensive linemen that could potentially be that guard. But at the end of the day, two guys need to step up because there's going to be two starting guards. There's going to be. Could there be three guys that play? I mean, sure. We can have that conversation at some point. But at the end of the day, when the game kicks off in Dublin against Navy in a few months, there are going to be two starting guards on the field for Notre Dame. And there's a lot of names to work through. Billy Schrauth, Ty Chan, Rocco Spindler, Andrew Kristofic, Michael Carmody. A lot of Sam Pendleton, a lot of talented players. There's no doubt. But to your point about the wide receivers, we're talking so much about potential because none of those guys are the guy yet. And it's not all their fault. You had obviously a couple of veteran guys playing guard last year. But is this the year that Billy Schrauth takes a massive step forward? Is this the year where Andrew Kristofic puts it all together? Those are the questions that we're kind of working through. It's very important because, Brian, I would say that the guard position could be the difference between being a good to very good offensive line and being an elite one. Like, that could be the difference because you expect a potential All-American at left tackle. You expect a good to very good starting center. You expect a very good starting right tackle. The difference is there a hole in this offensive line, or are you just at least solid across the board at every single spot and then great in a couple different actions?
Because if you're solid at guard this year, Ryan, this O-line is going to be filthy. I mean, it is, because there aren't many teams that are just great across the board.
100%.
There aren't. Michigan's offensive line the last 2 years has not been great at all five positions. As a matter of fact, I'd say they haven't really been great really anywhere, to be honest. Like, there's not like one lineman that I think Michigan had that was just like, oh my gosh, that guy was outstanding. There's nobody as good for them as like Broderick Jones was for Georgia, or Mike McGlinchey, or Liam Eichenberg, or Ronnie Stanley, or guys like that. There was nobody like that. It's just as a group, they play great together.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the center was an All-American caliber kid. I don't think either one of the tackles were great.
No.
I think Zach Zenter's a really good football player, but he's not elite.
I mean, you saw it at the Senior Bowl, Brian. It's like, yeah, Ryan Hayes is a good left tackle for Michigan, but then you get him kind of isolated in that type of situation, you're like, oh, he's
Right.
not that great. Like, he's just a
Right.
solid player, right? I mean, I would say Zach Zinner was probably the best one, in my opinion, on that offensive line the last 2 years. But, I mean, to your point, it's not like he's not like a slam dunk All-American, right? He's a very good player.
He's
There's
more
no
Alex
doubt.
Bars than he is Quentin Nelson as a player. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah.
But that line as a whole is outstanding.
They play really well together.
Outstanding offensive line, and that's the key. The guards don't have to be great for this to be a great offensive line. They just need to do your job consistently, effectively, and then the studs can take over at that point in time.
100%.
And that's what you start getting excited about.